Let us take a look at this pipe under your kitchen sink. It does not look like an emergency at glance, just a faint, damp ring around a pipe joint that most people ignore for weeks. This small, wet mark is usually the beginning of a much bigger failure that slowly develops while you continue using the same plumbing every single day. Welcome to Professor Hassan's lab, the kind of problem that every homeowner experiences at least once in their life. It always starts the same way. A tiny pipe leak that you promise yourself you will fix later because now it does not seem serious enough to worry about. But water does not wait for convenience. It keeps working in silence, expanding the pipe damage one drop at a time. Before we go deeper, if you have ever seen a pipe start leaking and thought, I will deal with it tomorrow, it turned into something worse. Comment the word leak, so we can see how common this really is. And stay with this carefully, because what you think is a plumbing problem is actually something much more predictable and much more controllable than most people realize. Inside every house, your plumbing system is constantly under pressure, even when no taps are open or water is visibly flowing. That pressure is what allows water to reach bathrooms, kitchen sinks, and garden lines instantly when you turn the handle. That same pressure is also what slowly destroys weak points in the plumbing system. Every pipe joint, every connector, every seal is fighting against that internal force 24 hours a day. Over time, even an installed plumbing system begins to show microscopic stress at connection points that you will never notice with your eyes. This is where pipe leaks are born. Not from explosions, but from invisible weakening that builds up over time until water finds the smallest possible escape path. Once that path opens slightly, the process becomes self-reinforcing. Water does not just leak out, it actively enlarges the opening with pressure and movement. That is why a pipe leak that starts as a drop per minute can become a steady drip within days or weeks. Most people respond in the wrong way. They tighten the pipe, fitting wipe the area dry, or wrap tape around the pipe joint hoping it will hold temporarily. Sometimes it works for a period, which creates a false sense of repair, but the underlying pipe weakness is still there. That is why the pipe leak always returns, because the real pipe issue was never addressed. The plumbing industry often presents repairs as choices: either live with the pipe problem or replace the entire section of pipe. In reality, there's a middle layer of solution that most people are never told about. That is where things get interesting. Because a large percentage of household pipe leaks are not pipe failures. They are surface-level sealing failures, meaning the pipe itself is still strong. The seal that connects two parts is no longer holding pressure properly. That distinction changes everything about how you approach the pipe problem. Of replacing expensive sections of plumbing, you're dealing with restoring the integrity of a sealing surface. This is where a simple material becomes surprisingly powerful. It is a self-fusing silicone repair tape or polymer sealing wrap that behaves differently from normal adhesive tape. At glance, it looks like ordinary black rubber tape, but its behavior under pressure is completely different, because it does not stick in the sense. It fuses to itself under tension. When you stretch and wrap it tightly around a leaking pipe joint, each layer bonds into the layer, forming a single unified rubber structure instead of stacked strips of tape. That means there are no edges, no peeling points, and no exposed adhesive that water can break down over time. Instead, it becomes a sealing sleeve around the pipe. Pressure actually improves its effectiveness instead of destroying it. The tightly it is wrapped, the stronger the pipe seal becomes. This is fundamentally different from repair methods that rely on glue or surface adhesion, which naturally degrade when exposed to moisture, vibration, and temperature changes. Most pipe systems in homes fail at connection points where different materials meet, such as metal to PVC or threaded joints under sinks. These are the areas where vibration from water flow and thermal expansion create microgaps over time. Even a gap smaller than a millimeter is enough for water to escape under pressure. Once it starts escaping, mineral deposits begin to form around the pipe leak, which sometimes temporarily slows it down but never fully stops it. That is why many pipe leaks look like they come and go. In reality, they are never gone. They are just temporarily blocked by buildup that eventually gets pushed away again. When a self-fusing silicone wrap is applied correctly, it creates a pressurized outer barrier that adapts to small movement in the pipe instead of breaking apart. This is important because plumbing systems are never completely still. Every time water flows, pressure shifts slightly. Every time temperature changes, materials contract. Every small vibration slowly tests the weakest point in the plumbing system. A rigid patch fails under those conditions. A fused elastic seal does not. Now here is where most people make a mistake during application. They try to apply the material only cover the visible pipe leak point instead of extending coverage beyond the damaged area. Pipe leaks are rarely isolated to a single visible spot. They usually extend slightly along the pipe joint, crack path in ways you cannot see immediately. That is why proper sealing always requires extending a centimeters beyond the pipe leak zone in both directions. This ensures you're not just covering the symptom, reinforcing the entire weak section of the pipe. Once applied correctly, the pipe repair does not just stop the leak, it stabilizes the area against future microfailures well. That is the real difference between temporary patching and structural sealing, because one simply hides the pipe problem for a while the other changes how that section of plumbing behaves under pressure going forward. Most people are surprised when they realize how many serious plumbing problems actually fall into this category of surface-level failures. Not burst pipes, not breaks, but small sealing issues that gradually escalate only because they were ignored for too long. And in cases, a simple solution applied at the right time prevents a costly repair from ever being necessary. Timing matters, because once water damage spreads into walls, cabinets, or flooring, you're no longer just dealing with a pipe problem, you're dealing with repair. That is why understanding pipe leaks is so important. They are warnings, not disasters. If you learn to respond at the right stage, you completely change the cost and complexity of home maintenance over time. Now let's continue from where most people get stuck. Because after understanding that leaks are about pressure and sealing failure, the real question becomes what actually stops water from escaping permanently without calling a plumber every single time. This is where most DIY fixes fail in practice, not in theory. People assume that stopping a leak is about covering the hole, but in plumbing systems, water does not behave like a drip from a bottle. It behaves like pressurized flow that constantly searches for the escape point in a connected system. That means even a looking patch can fail if it doesn't handle movement, vibration, and pressure changes at the same time. This is why many quick fixes look successful for hours or even a few days, but slowly start weeping again without warning. When that happens, people usually assume the product was useless. In reality, the application never matched the behavior of the plumbing system. Now, here is where a small but powerful category of repair materials becomes important. Self-fusing silicone tape and epoxy-based sealing compounds are designed for pressurized environments where traditional adhesives fail. They're not meant to stick in the sense because stickiness alone cannot survive continuous water pressure. Instead, they work through bonding between layers under tension. When stretched and wrapped correctly, the material compresses into itself. It forms a unified rubber-like structure that behaves almost like a new pipe skin. This is important because it turns an external surface into a reinforced pressure barrier. Unlike glue, it does not depend on a single fragile interface. Instead, every layer supports the layer, creating a self-reinforcing seal. That is why these materials are often used in emergency plumbing situations, especially when shutting off the water supply is difficult or temporary stabilization is required before repair. The real strength of this approach is not just emergency use. It is long-term stabilization of leaks that do not justify full pipe replacement. Now, let's talk about something most people never consider. Not all leaks are equal. Some leaks come from pipe fractures, which require replacement. Others come from fatigue, where seals degrade over time, but the pipe itself remains structurally sound. In household plumbing, joint fatigue is far more common than actual pipe failure. This is especially true under sinks behind toilets and in bathroom supply lines, where vibration and temperature changes are constant. In these areas, even high-quality installations eventually develop gaps. Once those gaps appear, water pressure does the rest of the work. It slowly pushes through, enlarging the gap in a cycle that continues until something interrupts it. This is where proper sealing techniques matter more than brute force replacement, because if the pipe is still structurally healthy, replacing it is not always necessary. What you need is controlled isolation of the leak point from system pressure. That is exactly what a properly applied, self-fusing seal creates. Application technique is where most failures happen. People usually wrap loosely, or they stop exactly at the visible leak, not realizing that the actual pressure pathway extends slightly beyond what they can see. Water does not respect boundaries. It travels through paths that form along the weakest structural line. So the correct method always involves extending coverage beyond the leak zone, ensuring that the pressure has no escape route, even if it shifts slightly over time. Another critical factor is surface preparation. Any oil, dust, or moisture residue on the pipe surface can reduce the effectiveness of the bond. That is why proper cleaning before application is not optional, it is essential. Because a sealing material is only as strong as the surface it is anchoring to. Once the surface is clean and dry, the material can fully engage with itself, form a stable structure. After that, tension becomes the key. A stretched wrap activates the fusion process that makes the material behave as a single solid layer instead of separate strips. This is where the transformation happens. The pipe joint stops behaving like a point and starts behaving like a reinforced section. Now let's step back and look at why this matters on a scale. Household plumbing systems are designed for decades of use. They are not designed to remain maintenance-free. They require reinforcement, especially at stress points. However, most homeowners only react when visible damage appears, then reinforcing weak points early. This reactive approach is what turns issues into expensive repairs. because a $2 material applied early can stabilize a joint before it becomes a full leak. Once water damage spreads into surrounding materials like wood, drywall, or insulation, the problem multiplies beyond plumbing alone. At that point, you're no longer just fixing a pipe. You are repairing damage. That is why early intervention is everything in leak management. This is where the psychology of repair becomes important. Most people delay action because small leaks feel harmless. A drip does not feel urgent. A damp patch does not feel like emergency territory. But plumbing systems do not operate based on urgency, they operate based on physics. Every hour a leak exists, it is actively expanding its failure point. So the real cost is not the repair itself, but the time lost before intervention. Now let's connect this back to reality. When a self-fusing repair tape or sealing compound is applied correctly, it can dramatically, completely stop surface leakage in low to moderate pressure systems. It is not a substitute for replacing a pipe, but it is extremely effective for stabilizing joints, connectors, and minor cracks. In many household cases, that is exactly where the problem lies. Not in failure, but in localized weakness. What makes this approach powerful is that it buys time and sometimes eliminates the need for intervention entirely. It must be understood correctly. It is not magic. It's controlled pressure management. Now, there's one detail that often gets overlooked. Temperature and moisture conditions during application matter. If applied on a surface or under active dripping without temporary control, the bonding quality decreases. That is why even simple preparation like shutting off water flow or drying the area with a cloth can dramatically improve results. Because again, the material is not fighting water directly. It is creating a barrier system that must be established before pressure fully resumes. Once set properly, it becomes surprisingly durable for household use. In many cases, it can last months or even years, depending on the conditions and pressure levels. The key takeaway is not just the material itself, it is understanding how leaks actually behave. Because once you understand that leaks are structural failures rather than random accidents, your entire approach to plumbing changes. You stop reacting and start responding strategically. Of repeatedly paying for temporary fixes, you begin reinforcing weak points early. That shift alone can save significant cost and prevent major damage over time. So the time you see a small drip under a sink or a faint moisture line near a pipe joint, don't think of it as a minor inconvenience. Think of it as the visible sign of a plumbing system under stress. If addressed correctly at that stage, a simple $2 solution can often do what expensive emergency repairs are normally called for. Not by hiding the problem, by stabilizing it before it grows.